Welcome to Fog Street Mysteries, where every story begins in shadows and every clue glows under a single street lamp. Here, classic noir meets modern storytelling, filled with sharp detectives, haunted secrets, impossible crimes, and twists waiting at every corner. If you love fog-soaked alleys, tense interrogations, and the electric thrill of unraveling a mystery, you're in the right place. Step inside, the next case is already waiting. Don't forget to share thoughts. Your feedback keeps the mystery alive. Now let's begin. Nero Wolfe and the Disappearing Bullet. Chapter 1, A Visitor with a Problem. At 11:30 on a Tuesday morning, the brownstone was in its usual state of domestic perfection, which is to say, Nero Wolfe was upstairs among the orchids, the kitchen smelled like Fritz was trying to seduce a cow with butter, and I was at my desk pretending to work. I say pretending because there are only so many times you can rearrange the files in the cabinet before you admit you're waiting for something interesting to happen. When you work for a man who weighs 1/7 of a ton and refuses to leave the house except under duress, you rely on the doorbell and the phone to bring the world to you. That's why, when the phone rang, I grabbed it as if it were my last chance at a matinee. "Office of Nero Wolfe," I said. "He thinks, I move, we both charge by the day." There was a pause, the kind you get when someone hasn't quite decided whether to talk to you or hang up and try another universe. "Is this Mr. Archie Goodwin?" A woman's voice. Low, careful, and stretched tight like it had been trying not to shake for a while and just lost the argument. "That's me," I said. "What's left of me, anyway? What can I do for you?" May I speak to Mr. Wolfe?" It's very important. A matter of life and death. People rarely call to chat about the price of lettuce, I told her. Name? Lydia Carroway. That got a small bell ringing. Carroway meant money, and lots of it. Real estate, shipping, and a sprinkling of charity boards to keep up appearances. The name had been in the papers recently, but I couldn't have told you why just then. I tucked it away to impress her later. "He's occupied at the moment," I said. "But you're in luck. He's due to descend like a large and cranky comet in about 10 minutes. You want an appointment?" There was another pause. I could hear her breathing, shallow and uneven. "If I come now," she said quietly, "will you let me in? Whether he agrees to see me or not." "That depends," I said. "Are you carrying a bomb, a subpoena, or a newspaper with my picture in it?" "No." "Then come ahead. 35th Street, West Side, brownstone, stoop with the iron railing that needs paint. You can't miss it. If you do, you should just go home and stay there, New York is not for you." "I'll be there in 15 minutes, she said, and hung up. I got up and went to the kitchen. Fritz was at the stove coaxing something creamy into becoming a sauce. He turned his head, smiling that small, polite smile he saves for everyone but Wolfe and me. "You are restless, Archie," he observed. "I'm employed, Fritz," I said. "It looks strange, but the doctor says it won't last. We're expecting a visitor of the female persuasion. You might want to brace the furniture." "A client?" His eyebrows rose. "At this hour? Before lunch?" She said life and death. Death usually doesn't check Wolfe's schedule. He sniffed and went back to stirring. The kitchen clock gave me 8 minutes until orchid time was over. Right on cue, at 11:45, I heard the elevator in the hall and then the unmistakable slow tread coming down from the plant rooms. Nero Wolfe entered the office, moving like a man who considered gravity a personal insult but had learned to live with it. He was in his brown suit with the yellow shirt, which meant the world was calm and the menu didn't involve anything experimental. He crossed to his chair behind his desk, eased himself into it, arranged his bulk, and closed his eyes briefly. "Beer," he said. I went to the cabinet, got him one of the special, chilled, narrow glasses, and poured with due ceremony. He opened his eyes long enough to inspect the head, grunted approval, and took a sip. "All right," he said. You are looking at me with the expression of a man who has either broken something or expects someone else to. Which is it? Neither yet, I told him, taking my own chair at my desk. But we have a possible client coming. Name of Lydia Carroway. One of Wolfe's eyebrows twitched, which for him was the equivalent of a backflip. Carroway, he repeated. The real estate people. The same. She called a few minutes ago. Said it was about life and death. Sounded like she meant it. Humph, he set the glass down. I am not a paramedic, Archie. Nor am I a confessor. Carroway, there was something in the Gazette last week. An engagement announcement. That's right, I said. Her and a Richard, Vance. Investment type. I remember the picture. He had the kind of chin money buys when you get it done early. Wolfe closed his eyes again. If she wishes to retain me to advise on her nuptials, you may inform her that I am unqualified. Matrimony is a phenomenon I have observed but never studied. It would have required fieldwork. Relax, I said. Here she comes now. You can tell her yourself. The bell rang. I went to answer it. Lydia Carroway looked like she'd spent the last 3 days being chased by a nightmare and the last 3 hours in front of a mirror trying to hide it. She was tall, in a tailored navy suit that probably cost Fritz's annual salary, with a pale face framed by dark hair pinned up neatly. The neatness didn't reach her eyes, they were wide and brittle, like glass that's been tapped too many times. Miss Carroway? I said. Yes. Mr. Goodwin? She searched my face like she was checking for fangs. Should I have called a lawyer instead? If you want someone to file motions, yes. If you want someone to keep you from getting killed or railroaded, you've come to the right address. Come in. I took her coat and gloves and led her down the hall to the office. She hesitated on the threshold, taking in the globe, the books, the big desk, and the bigger man behind it. Miss Lydia Carroway, I announced. To see if life can beat death on points. Wolfe's eyes opened. He looked at her, and I could see him doing that thing he does where he weighs, measures, and classifies you like he's putting you on a shelf in his brain. Good morning, Miss Carroway, he said. Sit down. If you are here to sell anything, don't. If you are here to complain about the police, be concise. If you are here to solicit sympathy, you waste your time. She sat on the edge of the red leather chair I indicated, gripping her handbag so hard her knuckles went pale. I'm here, she said, because my fiancé was murdered in front of me, and the police think it didn't happen. That got Wolfe's full attention. He leaned back, folding his hands on the curve of his middle. Phooey, he said. If he was murdered, he is dead. If he is dead, they have a corpse. Corpses are persuasive. Explain. She swallowed. 3 nights ago. At his apartment. The police say it's impossible, that it's some kind of hysteria or, her fingers tightened on the bag. They think I'm lying. Are you? Wolfe asked. She flinched as if he'd slapped her. No. All right, he said calmly. Begin at the beginning. If you digress, Mr. Goodwin will cough. I have a very elegant cough, I said. It's a pity to waste it. She managed a flicker of a smile that died fast. His name was Richard Vance. We were engaged 2 months ago. He lived in a penthouse on East 53rd. That night he called and asked me to come over at 10. He sounded tense. He wouldn't say why, just that he needed to talk, and it couldn't wait. She told it straight, but the way her voice kept sliding toward the edge told me she was holding on by habit. They'd had drinks in the living room, city lights outside, the whole midtown glamour setup. He'd been jumpy, checking the window, the door, his watch. Finally he'd gone to a desk drawer, taken out a revolver, and told her there'd been threats. Someone wanted money. Someone who knew things about him. What kind of things? Wolfe asked. I don't know, she said quickly. Too quickly. I filed that. He wouldn't tell me. He said he'd taken care of it. Paid. But the threats continued. Threats that said what, exactly? Wolfe asked. He burned one of the letters, she said. The other, I brought. She opened the handbag with hands that weren't quite steady and pulled out an envelope. I moved to take it, but Wolfe crooked a finger, and I brought it to him instead. He extracted a single sheet, glanced at it, and snorted. It was short and to the point, a typed demand for more money, with a line about the girl this time, and a promise that next time wouldn't be a warning. No signature, Wolfe said. No watermark worth bothering about. Tasteless paper. Humph, proceed. She took a breath. He said he wouldn't be bullied again. That he'd go to the police. He put the letter in his pocket and set the gun on the table. We argued. I told him he should have gone to them long ago. He said he didn't dare. And then? I prompted. And then, she whispered, the phone rang. It was a call he took in the bedroom, door half closed. She heard his voice rise once, then drop. When he came back he was pale and sweating and reaching for the gun again. He crossed the room, toward the French doors leading to the terrace, as if he expected someone out there. And you? Wolfe said. I followed him. I was about 6 feet behind when the shot went off. She stopped. I waited. Wolfe waited. When he doesn't rush someone, it's not kindness. It's strategy. There was a flash, she said finally. Smoke. A loud crack. I saw the muzzle flare. I saw it. He jerked, dropped the gun, and fell. There was blood on his shirt. I screamed. The neighbors heard, they called the police. They were there in minutes. She shut her eyes. They found me on the floor next to him. And the gun? I asked. On the carpet, a few inches from his hand. They checked it. One chamber empty. The others loaded. But, I said, no bullet. Her eyes opened. She looked at me like I'd just pulled a rabbit from her handbag. How did you? You said the police think it didn't happen, I told her. If they had a bullet, they'd think something else. They searched, she said. Everywhere. The walls, the floor, the furniture. They even cut open a cushion. There was no bullet. None. The medical examiner says the wound resembles a gunshot, but there's no trace of a projectile. No metal fragments. Nothing. Wolfe's eyes had gone half-lidded. That's when they're most dangerous. And their hypothesis, he asked. That I'm hysterical. That I imagined the flash and the shot. That Richard had some kind of attack and fell, and the gun went off harmlessly, and she bit her lip. They're polite because of my family. But they think I'm lying. Or crazy. And you? Wolfe inquired. What do you think? I think, she straightened suddenly, and for a second I got a look at the steel under the nerves. I think someone killed him. And I think they did it right in front of me and arranged it so that no one would believe me. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a folded cashier's check. When she laid it on Wolfe's desk, the number made my eyebrows try to climb off my face. This is a retainer, she said. If you'll take the case. I need someone who doesn't care what the police think. I need someone who believes what is, not what ought to be. Wolfe regarded the check without touching it. The room had gone very quiet. Out in the hall, I could hear the faint hum of the elevator cables. Upstairs, 1,000 orchids were breathing whatever orchids breathe. A bullet, Wolfe murmured. A gunshot wound without a bullet. A corpse that argues and evidence that contradicts. That is intolerable. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and focused on her. Very well, Miss Carroway. I will undertake to determine how Richard Vance died and who arranged it. Mr. Goodwin will start this afternoon. I let out the breath I'd been holding. Always a pleasure to be volunteered, I said. Where do you want me first? The penthouse or homicide? Both, he said. In that order. And Archie? Yes, sir. Do not, he said, reaching for his beer, let Mr. Kramer persuade you that the impossible is acceptable merely because it is convenient. It never is. Chapter 2, The Crime with No Projectile. If you ever want to test the limits of Manhattan hospitality, try showing up at a luxury building on East 53rd Street and telling the doorman you're there to revisit a murder the police don't believe happened. It's better than a Broadway show. I got the whole routine, the wary eye, the stiff posture, the polite but deadly, "May I help you, sir?" that translates to "state your business or go bother the pigeons." I flashed my license and gave him the sunny smile that has melted hearts and occasionally loosened tongues. Archie Goodwin. I'm working for Miss Lydia Carroway. That did it. He stiffened even further, which impressed me, and buzzed me up like he hoped the elevator cable might snap. The penthouse corridor had that expensive silence money buys, thick carpet, thick doors, thick air. When I reached Vance's apartment, I noticed the police seal still across the frame. I had Kramer's number in my pocket, but he was likely having lunch, which made him even less agreeable than usual. Still, he owed Wolfe a few favors, very tiny ones, but enough. I called him from the hall phone. He answered on the fifth ring with the tone of a man deciding whether to arrest the telephone. "What?" he barked. "Hello, Inspector. Archie Goodwin here, sunshine of your life." "Goodwin," he growled. "If you're calling to gloat, hang up so I can go on pretending I don't know you." "No gloating," I said. "I need access to the Vance apartment. Wolfe is on the case." He swore in a way that made two passing tenants scuttle back into the elevator like frightened shrimp. Another pause. Another swear. Then. "Fine. Don't touch anything. And tell Wolfe, no, never mind what to tell Wolfe. Just don't tamper, Goodwin. I mean it." "Inspector," I said sweetly, "tampering is beneath me. I only stand near things very suggestively." He hung up. I broke the seal and stepped inside. The place looked like a postcard titled Modern Wealth, Exhibit A, white sofas, chrome accents, city view stretching like a neon menu. But the glamour had a bruise on it, the kind crime scenes always have. Police powder still dusted the glass coffee table. A chalk outline offered a minimalistic tribute to Richard Vance. I started with the French doors that opened onto the terrace. No scratches on the frame, no signs anyone had been forced in or out. The terrace itself was clean, too clean. If someone had fired from outside, they'd have needed footing, space, and nerves of steel. Also lungs of steel, given the cold wind sweeping over the city that night. Inside, I checked the floor for anything the cops might have missed. When you say something like that in Wolfe's office, Wolfe snorts as if you've claimed you can outthink Newton on gravity. But cops, like everyone else, sometimes have bad lighting. In one corner, near a lamp, I spotted the faintest dark fleck, blood, probably. Not revolutionary, but worth noting. I made a mental file. Then the doorbell chimed. I wasn't expecting guests, but murder scenes have fewer boundaries than Times Square in July, so I prepared my best puzzled visitor face and opened up. A man stood there with a face like a well-pressed suit, sharp lines, narrow eyes, expensive taste. He held a briefcase and the kind of expression that belongs on a man who doesn't use crosswalks because he assumes traffic will stop for him. "You're not the police," he said. "Amazing deduction," I replied. "Archie Goodwin. Who might you be?" "Arthur Lamb," he said, handing me a card I didn't ask for. "Lamb and Hobart, Financial Advisement. I handle Mr. Vance's accounts." The building notified me someone had entered. "Good for them," I said. You connected to the case. In a manner of speaking. I need access to the apartment. I'm verifying certain documents. Not without a note from Santa Claus, I told him. This is still a police scene. His lips thinned. Miss Carroway will want his papers secured. That gave me a little jolt. He'd jumped to her name fast, too fast. I pocketed the card. Come in, I said. But don't touch anything unless you want Kramer to eat you whole. He stepped inside, looking around with a calculating air. This room is where it happened, he asked. That's what they say. He wandered toward the desk, eyeing a stack of monogrammed stationery. Richard wasn't a cautious man, Lamb mused. He often acted impulsively. Generously at times. Foolishly at others. That so? Any foolishness recently? Lamb didn't answer. Instead, he cleared his throat and pointed at the desk drawer. The police searched that? Yes, I said. Thoroughly enough to ruin any hope of Vance getting his security deposit back. He didn't smile. Men like Lamb don't waste calories on smiling. Miss Carroway is fragile at the moment, he said. She shouldn't be dragged into any unnecessary complications. Such as? Speculation, he said. Rumors. Questions about Richard's finances. Finances, I repeated. Meaning, debts. His jaw tightened. If Mr. Vance owed anyone money, it wasn't relevant to her. And you're deciding what's relevant for her now? He didn't like that. For a second, something flashed behind his eyes, anger, fear, or maybe the realization that his tie was too tight. Before he could answer, the elevator clanked again. Two new faces appeared, a blonde with a lethal haircut and a dress tailored to produce car accidents, and a man who looked like he'd swallowed a gallon of anxiety for breakfast. The man clutched a notebook. The woman clutched the man's nerves. Excuse me, the woman said, flashing a badge. Detective Molly Stedman. Midtown Homicide. Her partner, a thin reed named Chilworth, nodded at me like he was apologizing for existing. Kramer must have figured my entry required supervision. Goodwin, Stedman said, stepping into the apartment. You collecting rent up here? No, I said. Just admiring the decor and pondering existential crimes. She smirked. Right. Try not to contaminate the universe while we're all here. Chilworth went to take notes, but his hands were shaking enough to produce abstract art. Stedman walked straight to the terrace doors and examined the frame with her fingernail. Kramer says Wolfe's on the case. Is that true? Yes, I said. Try not to faint. She didn't faint, but she did sigh like a woman who just remembered a dental appointment. Great. That'll make things easier and harder. Welcome to my life, I told her. She looked around the room. We found no shell casing, no bullet, no ricochet, no residue on the terrace. Autopsy found no projectile. The gun discharged, but nothing launched. It's bizarre. Lamb stiffened. Perhaps you're mistaken. Stedman cut him a look. I don't mistake things. I misplace keys, not bullets. That would suggest, I said, someone fired something that doesn't stay fired. She raised an eyebrow. You got a theory, Goodwin? Only one. Whoever planned this was clever enough to fool the cops and cruel enough to leave the lady looking like a liar. Stedman studied me, then turned to Lamb. Why are you here? To secure financial papers, he said tightly. Nothing gets secured until we finish, she said. Sit. He sat. He didn't like it. I spent the next hour combing the apartment with the cops, Lamb watching like a nervous vulture. No bullet. No weapon modifications. But I did catch something interesting, a faint indentation on the terrace railing, not a bullet mark, but maybe where something had rested, briefly. I marked it mentally. By the time I left, the afternoon had slipped into that gray New York twilight where the wind tastes like metal and the taxis sound like arguments. Back at the brownstone, the scent of Wolfe's orchids greeted me before the man himself did. I found him in the office, deep in his chair, gesturing with his beer like a Roman emperor demanding tribute. "Well?" he asked. "Well," I said, "it's a real sweetheart of a mess. 3 visitors, each twitchier than the last. No bullet. No casing. No trajectory. Some mysterious financial advisor who doesn't want Lydia knowing anything. And a detective who's too smart to ignore this but too annoyed to like it." Wolfe closed his eyes. "Summarize." So I did: Lamb's evasiveness, the terrace mark, Stedman's frustration, the general absence of anything resembling a projectile. When I finished, Wolfe opened his eyes and steepled his fingers. "A gunshot without a bullet," he murmured. "A wound without a wound. A murder without a method." He exhaled. "Whoever designed this wishes to insult reason itself." "That's New York for you," I said. "Humph, Archie, we must determine how a man can be shot without being shot." "And where do I start?" "Everywhere," he said simply. "Begin with human motives. Then facts. Then contradictions. And Archie." "Yes." "Do not," he said, "let the police dictate your curiosity. Kramer is constrained by evidence. You are not." I grinned. "Wolfe, that's the nicest thing you've ever said to me." "It wasn't a compliment," he said. "It was an instruction." And that was how my evening began, with Wolfe anchored in his chair, orchids upstairs humming like an alien forest, and me heading back out into the city where bullets vanish, suspects multiply, and murder hides in the cracks of skyscrapers. The case had just begun, and already it was trying to slip through my fingers. Chapter 3, Suspects with Motives. There are 2 kinds of mornings at the brownstone: quiet ones where Wolfe and I exist in a peaceful, productive silence, and loud ones where I'm stomping around with a phone wedged to my ear while Wolfe makes disapproving noises behind the Times. This was a loud one. The minute Fritz brought in breakfast, corned beef hash that could soothe the dead, the phone started ringing like it had a quota to meet. I fielded calls from Inspector Kramer, Goodwin, "If Wolfe meddles 1 more inch, Detective Stedman, if I find you in that penthouse again, I'll make you vacuum it," and a reporter from the Ledger who politely asked if I would confirm or deny rumors that Nero Wolfe is on the case, to which I replied that Wolfe wouldn't confirm or deny being alive unless subpoenaed. When I finally reached the bottom of the morning heap, Wolfe folded his newspaper in that precise, offended way he reserves for when I've annoyed him by existing. "Archie," he said, "it is only 9:30. That racket is intolerable." "It's called work," I said. "Part of our business. You remember business, don't you?" "I remember peaceful breakfasts," he said. "And I remember an assistant who once had the decency to let me finish them." "What now?" "We need to talk suspects," I told him. "Before I go chasing them around the city." "Humph," he lifted his coffee cup. "Proceed." I took my notebook and leaned back, because if you're going to explain the world to Nero Wolfe, you might as well be comfortable. "So far," I said, "we have 1 grieving heiress, 2 financial question marks, 1 dead fiancé who may have been swimming in debt, a couple of resentful relatives who haven't made their entrance yet, a secretary with nerves of glass, and an art dealer rumored to have the ethics of a bored hyena." Wolfe stared at me. "Archie, if you intend to provide summaries in the manner of a gossip columnist, kindly resign and apply to the tabloids. Give me facts." "Facts," I echoed. "Fine. Let's start with Vance's cousin. His name is Harvey Rook. He inherited nothing from Vance but apparently hoped to. He's already made comments to reporters about mysterious circumstances and possible foul play. The kind of guy who'd accuse a lamppost of conspiracy if the light flickered." Wolfe grunted. "Jealousy and expectation. Pedestrian." "Next," I said, "there's Marion Dunn, the personal secretary. She was at the penthouse earlier that afternoon. Nervous as a rabbit in a dog show. Claims she left before the calls and threats started, but she couldn't look me in the eye when she said it. She is lying, Wolfe said simply. Right, I said. So either she knows something, or she did something. Noted. And then, I said, there's the art dealer, Philip Montre. Reports say Vance bought 3 pieces from him in the past month. Pricey things. Too pricey, some say. Montre and Vance apparently had business disagreements. In other words, Wolfe said, Montre was bleeding him. Allegedly. Which brings us to Mr. Arthur Lamb. Wolfe's face soured like I'd said, kale salad. Archie, he rumbled, what is your impression of that man? My impression, I said, is that he'd charge his own grandmother interest on a handshake. And that he knows more about Vance's finances than he's willing to tell anyone with a badge. Humph. I waited. Wolfe was thinking, and when Wolfe thinks, the atmosphere in the room changes. The light gets heavier. The air gets more judgmental. Finally he spoke. Mr. Vance was being blackmailed. According to Lydia, yes. And he paid. Looks that way. So, Wolfe said, we have a man under financial strain, facing extortion, with questionable associates, a volatile temperament, and access to weapons. Yet the method of death is preposterous. That dichotomy is troubling. I agree, I said. Very troubling. Which means you want me to go rattle cages. Yes, Wolfe said. But delicately. No, he said. You rattle like a bull in a glassware shop. Go anyway. The cousin with the convenient memory. Harvey Rook lived in a townhouse that screamed inherited money. He opened the door himself, which surprised me. I had him pegged for a man who hired someone specifically so he wouldn't have to touch doorknobs. Oh, he said, blinking. You're that detective fellow. One of them, I said. Got a few minutes? I suppose, he said, stepping aside. If this is about Richard, I've already told the police everything I know. Great, I said. Now tell me what you didn't tell them. He stiffened. I beg your pardon. You heard me. You had expectations, Mr. Rook. You expected to inherit something, or you expected to use Richard for leverage. That's absurd. Sure, I said. So was a gunshot without a bullet, yet here we are. His face went pale. I don't know anything about that. But Richard, he wasn't stable lately. Unstable how? He fidgeted. Erratic. Nervous. He said someone was threatening him. I told him to call the police. He said he couldn't. Why? He wouldn't say. He hesitated. But he said, if anything happened to him, someone would try to make it look like he was lying. Or mad. I raised an eyebrow. That was new. Did he say who? No. And he looked terrified. The secretary with something to hide. Next stop, Marion Dunn's apartment in Midtown. The place was tidy enough to pass military inspection, but her eyes were red-rimmed, and she kept twisting her hands like she was trying to wring her nerves out through her fingertips. Miss Dunn, I said gently, you were the last person to see Vance alive before the shooting. Why lie about anything? I didn't lie. Then why dodge my questions at the penthouse? Her lip trembled. I was afraid. Mr. Vance had been acting strange that day. Jumpy. He made 2 phone calls from his office before I left. Calls to who? I don't know. But when I brought him documents to sign, he snapped at me. He never snapped. He was sweating. He kept saying, not again. Not again. I left early because I didn't want to be there. She wasn't lying now, that much I could tell. But she was still hiding something. I waited. Silence can be more persuasive than questions. Finally she whispered, there was someone else. Someone he said would ruin everything. Name? I don't know, she said miserably. He never told me. Another secret stuffed into a corner. The art dealer with the convenient alibi. Last on my list, Montre's Gallery, a sleek room lit like a jewelry box and priced like a ransom note. Montre himself was leaning over a sculpture when I arrived. He smiled like a man who practiced smiling in the mirror every morning. I hear you were close with Richard Vance, I said. Close. He shrugged. He was a client. A wealthy one. That's as close as anyone gets to an art dealer. Any recent disagreements? He chuckled. Mr. Goodwin, all business is disagreement lightly varnished. Let's scrape the varnish, I said. Were you bleeding him? His smile didn't flicker. If Richard had financial trouble, that was not my doing. Did you know he was being blackmailed? That got him. His eyes darted a fraction too quickly. I may have heard something. Rumors. Rumors from where? A friend. Someone who overheard him arguing with a man outside the gallery last week. Something about payment. A name? No, he said lightly, but his fingers were tapping the counter. A nervous tell. Another maybe lie. Another maybe motive. Back to the brownstone. By the time I got home, the orchids were perfuming the whole house with that smug botanical aroma they love to exhale after a good misting. Wolfe was in his chair, a book open on his lap, eyes half-lidded but very alert. Well, he said without looking up. Well, I said, dropping my hat on my desk, Vance had more enemies than a crooked chess champion. His cousin says Vance predicted someone would make him look crazy. His secretary says he made mystery calls and freaked out. And the art dealer is lying with his teeth. And the financial advisor? Lamb, I said, is hiding something. Something big. Wolfe nodded once, slow, heavy, meaningful. These people, he said, are not connected by chance. Something binds them. Something Vance knew. He tapped his fingers together. Archie, we must discover why the bullet vanished. And how, I said. No, Wolfe murmured. Why first? Always why. Only then how. He closed his eyes. A minute later, he opened them. Tomorrow, he said, we start pulling strings. And today? He looked at the clock. Today, Archie, is for orchids. And beer. And thought. Which meant the rest of the legwork, surveillance, digging, interviewing, possibly dodging bullets, was all mine. I didn't mind. I like my job. But for the first time in this case, I felt something new. Whoever killed Richard Vance wasn't just clever. They were dangerous. And getting closer. Chapter 4, The Trick Behind the Missing Bullet. If ever there was a day designed specifically to annoy me, it was the Thursday I spent chasing ghosts through Manhattan while Nero Wolfe sat at home contemplating the metaphysics of a bullet that refused to exist. I don't mind doing the legwork, that's what he pays me for, and I'm good at it. But I reserve the right to complain about the universe's sense of humor. The morning began with Wolfe emerging from the plant room smelling faintly of orchid fertilizer and disdain. He lowered himself into the big chair with all the grace of a collapsing monument and signaled for his beer with 2 fingers. That meant his brain was running hot. Archie, he said, after the first sip, I've resolved one matter. Excellent, I said. Which one? The case? World hunger. Your opinion of Tuesdays? He ignored me. Wolfe ignoring me is one of the constants of the universe, like gravity and Kramer's temper. No man, Wolfe said, no matter how careless, accidentally invents a gunshot wound without a bullet. The method was deliberate. Ingenious, even. What method? I asked. His eyelids drooped. I do not know yet. Thank you, I said. Your optimism is contagious. Humph. We require more data. You must obtain it. I figured as much, I said. Where do you want me? Everywhere, he said. But begin with the medical examiner's office. Mr. Vance's autopsy contains contradictions I cannot reconcile from memory. And after that? He leaned back like a whale sinking into warm water. Find out who benefits if the world believes Miss Carroway's account is unhinged. That's a long list, I said. Including the whole of Midtown homicide. He didn't smile, but his eyebrow twitched in amusement. Then you will be busy. A visit to the ME. The medical examiner's office was housed in a building that smelled like antiseptic, resignation, and too many conclusions waiting to be drawn. I flashed my credentials and requested access to Vance's file. The assistant pathologist on duty, Dr. Robert Kimball, greeted me with the enthusiasm of a man who had already drunk 6 coffees too many. Goodwin, he said, rubbing his eyes. Of course. If Wolfe sent you, that means the police are about to get a migraine. He sends his regards, I said, and a reminder that science is supposed to solve problems, not dance around them. Kimball snorted. Tell Wolfe that science can't invent a bullet that melts. I didn't tell you it melted. He blinked. You didn't have to. Look at this. He handed me the autopsy report. The wound was described as circular, consistent with a gunshot, but lacking metal fragments, residue, or a clear path. The tissue was torn, but in a peculiar way, like something struck hard and then, dissolved. What could cause that? I asked. Ask your boss, he said. He's got a better imagination than I do. A thought nudged my brain. Could this be staged? Could the wound be artificial? Kimball shook his head. No. The blood flow is real. The trauma is real. Whatever hit him fast and vanished faster. I'd call it impossible, except I saw it myself. Impossible is Wolfe's preferred breakfast, I said. Thanks, document. As I left, Kimball added, oh, and Goodwin. Vance's blood tests showed signs of severe stress. Elevated cortisol. Sleep deprivation markers. Your guy was scared out of his wits for days. That matched Lydia's story. What didn't match was everything else. The shadow in the alley. My next stop was the diner across from Vance's gallery. It was the kind of place where the cook yells at the waitresses with affection and the coffee could remove paint. I was halfway through a cup when a shadow slid across the booth. I looked up. A thin man with a haircut done by guesswork stood there, twitchy as a live wire. You're Goodwin, he said. I have been accused of that, I replied. What can I do for you? He sat without invitation. My name's Cole Danning. I work nights at the gallery. Montre didn't tell you everything. No kidding, I said. If he told me everything, I'd send Wolfe a telegram. Danning leaned forward. 3 nights before Vance died, I heard him yelling outside the gallery. He was arguing with a man. Didn't see his face. But I heard what he said. Let's hear it. Vance said, I paid you. I paid all of it. And the other guy said something like, not enough. Then Vance said, if you push me any harder, I'll tell her everything. Her, I repeated. Meaning Lydia? That's what I figured. What happened next? He left. Shaking. You tell the cops. He laughed bitterly. Yeah. They told me not to waste their time. Before I could press him further, he glanced past my shoulder and paled. Forget we talked. Why? He bolted from the booth and out the door. I turned. But the street outside was empty. Wolfe's diagnosis of human folly. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was knee-deep in orchids again, which meant I had to drag him down like a reluctant deity from Mount Flora. When he finally returned to the office, He looked at me with the expression he reserves for people who interrupt him during pedal dissections. Well? I gave him the updates: Kimball's impossible wound, Vance's stress levels, the gallery argument, Danning's fear. Wolfe listened without fidgeting, which is his version of rapt attention. "This," he said at last, "is a web." "No kidding." "A man paying blackmail," Wolfe mused. "A man threatening to expose something. A mistress? An affair? A misdeed? Or," I said, "something that would make Lydia leave him." Wolfe shook his head. "No. Miss Carroway is not the fulcrum of this mechanism. She is a piece. One moved carefully. By who?" He closed his eyes. "By someone who wished to destroy her credibility." "And Vance?" "Collateral." I frowned. "You think the real target wasn't him?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that we have not yet determined the motive. And until we do, the rest is conjecture." A follow carried too far. The sun went down, and the city lit up like a restless circuit. I took a cab to follow up on Danning's route home, partly to find him, partly to see who scared him off. New York at night smells like hot metal, wet concrete, and too many secrets whispered into pay phones. I trailed Danning's usual path, the alley behind the gallery, the laundry corner, the elevated tracks. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I slowed. They slowed. I stopped. They stopped. I spun fast. A man in a dark coat lunged out of the shadows, swinging something heavy. Instinct kicked in, I dodged, the object whooshing past my ear. I grabbed his wrist, twisted hard, and he grunted, dropping the weapon. A length of pipe. He swung again with his free hand. I ducked and drove my fist into his ribs. He staggered back, but didn't fall. Tough guy. He ran. I sprinted after him, but he melted into the maze of alleys like smoke. I cursed New York's fondness for narrow escape routes and returned to examine the pipe. Wrapped around the handle was a small strip of cloth, expensive cloth. Tailored. Someone with good taste wanted me dead. Wolfe was not going to like that. Back to the brownstone with bruises. Wolfe looked up from his beer when I staggered in. His eyes flicked to the rip in my jacket, the bruise blossoming on my cheek, and the pipe in my hand. "Humph," he said. "You were attacked. You're getting psychic in your old age." He scowled. "Details." I gave him the whole story. When I finished, he pressed his fingertips together, his version of clutching pearls. "This," he said quietly, "is intolerable." "I agree," I said. "It means," Wolfe said, "that someone fears your inquiries." "That," I said, "or they just don't like my personality." "Nonsense. Everyone finds you irritating, yet few attempt murder." "Archie," he leaned forward. "We are close to something." I nodded. "Close enough for them to try shutting me up." He glared at the fireplace like it had personally offended him. "No more wandering alone at night." "Boss," I said, "that's adorable." He growled. "Archie." "I'll be careful," I said. "But we need to find Danning. He knows something." "Yes," Wolfe agreed. "And someone knows he knows." He closed his eyes. "The method," he murmured. "The missing projectile. The motive. The frame against Miss Carroway. All of it entwined. Archie, tomorrow, we pursue this from another angle. And today." He reached for his beer. "Today," he said, "I think." Which meant tomorrow I'd be out in the field again, looking for answers, and maybe another pipe in the dark. It was becoming a habit. Chapter 5, Wolfe Sets the Table. If Nero Wolfe ever writes his memoirs, and heaven help the typesetter, I expect a good third of it will be dedicated to explaining why the world consistently refuses to accommodate his schedule. Thursday morning was Exhibit A, Fritz had just served a breakfast so perfect it deserved applause. Wolfe had settled in with his orchids for their 11-to-1 meditation session, and I was cataloging bruises from my run-in with the pipe when the doorbell rang. Twice. With urgency. In a house where interruptions are considered moral offenses, this is how wars start. I got to the door before Fritz could peek out with the ladle. What stood on the stoop was Lydia Carroway, hair windblown, eyes wide, and wearing a coat far too light for the weather. She wasn't frightened this time. She was terrified. "Mr. Goodwin," she breathed. Someone followed me." I ushered her inside fast. Fritz, sensing drama, vanished into the kitchen to fetch brandy, which is his version of waving smelling salts. "Where?" I asked. "From the library on 42nd. I was trying to distract myself. I thought I saw a man staring at me. I left. He followed. I took a cab, but he took the next one. I circled blocks and then told the driver to bring me here." "That's smart," I said. "Next time, let's skip the scenic tour and come straight here from the library." "I didn't know what to do," she whispered. "Why would anyone follow me? I don't know anything." She didn't. But someone wanted her to think she did. Wolfe, fragrant with orchid humidity and annoyance, descended the stairs at that moment. He entered the office like a thundercloud discovering a picnic. "Good heavens," he muttered. "What now?" Lydia stood, wringing her gloves. "Mr. Wolfe, I'm so sorry to intrude." "You are not intruding," he said, though his tone suggested he wished the world came with a mute button. "Miss Carroway, sit. Explain." She did. Wolfe listened with his eyes closed, a sign that he was either concentrating or trying to avoid the temptation of strangling someone. When she finished, he opened his eyes and gave her the full Wolfe stare, heavy, deliberate, and uncomfortably penetrating. "Someone," he said, "is attempting to unnerve you. They wish you rattled, discredited, and ideally isolated." "But why?" she whispered. "Possibly," Wolfe said, "because you were not meant to survive the night your fiancé died." Her face went white, and I moved to steady her, but Wolfe shook his head. "Do not coddle her, Archie. She must understand the gravity." "Boss," I said, "she's scared, not stupid." "Humph, Miss Carroway, compose yourself. Panic is useless." To her credit, she did. She drew a breath, straightened her shoulders, and nodded. Wolfe approved of that response. He gestured toward the red chair. "Now," he said. "Mr. Goodwin has gathered information. I have reflected. And I am prepared to advance the next stage." "The next stage?" I asked. "Yes," Wolfe said. "Interviews. Here. Controlled. Exhaustive. Meaning," I translated, "we're inviting the suspects." Wolfe glared at me for ruining his rhetorical flourish. "Yes. Individually at first. Then collectively." Lydia gasped. "You're bringing them here?" "Certainly," Wolfe said. "A man is less dangerous when confronted in a room he does not control. And if he attempts violence, Mr. Goodwin is capable of responding." She gave me a doubtful glance, presumably because of the bruise blooming like abstract art on my cheek. "That was decorative," I said. "I'm fine." Before Wolfe could launch into a lecture on recklessness versus male vanity, Fritz reappeared with brandy. Lydia drank half in one gulp, coughed, and immediately looked better. Once she was steady, Wolfe gave her instructions. She was to stay home, keep doors locked, avoid solitary errands, and speak to no one outside immediate family without informing us. She nodded dutifully. "Good," Wolfe said. "Archie, call Detective Stedman." "Why?" I asked. "Because," he said, "the police must be informed that Miss Carroway is endangered. They will, naturally, ignore us, but the courtesy must be extended." I dialed Stedman. She was not thrilled. "Goodwin," she sighed, "I swear you cause more paperwork than armed robberies." "Love you too," I said. "Listen, Lydia Carroway was followed this morning. Wolfe wants you informed." There was a pause. A real one. Not dramatic. Concerned. "I'll send a patrol car to her building," she said quietly. "Don't let her wander." "Trust me," I said. "She's staying put." After hanging up, I turned to Wolfe. "So, interrogation day. Who first?" Wolfe closed his eyes again. "Mr. Lamb." "Why him?" "He is excessively interested in Miss Carroway's ignorance." I noticed. Wolfe gestured. "Go fetch him." A stroll through financial respectability. Arthur Lamb's office resembled his personality, immaculate, overpolished, and suspiciously curated. He looked up from a stack of papers with a grimace. "Mr. Goodwin," he said. "This is a surprise." "You're going to love the next one," I said. "Wolfe wants to see you. Today." He stiffened. "I have appointments." "Cancel them," I said. "Or don't. I'll drag you there either way, but one of those versions will wrinkle your suit." He muttered something about unreasonable men, but got his coat. As we headed to the street, he said, "What is this about?" "Questions," I told him. "Answers. The usual. Unless you'd like to confess now and save yourself cab fare." He slammed the cab door hard enough to startle the driver. "Wolfe's examination begins." When we returned, Wolfe was behind his desk, hands folded like a judge preparing to sentence someone. Lamb sat opposite him, trying not to sweat. "Mr. Lamb," Wolfe said pleasantly, "you were Mr. Vance's financial advisor." "Yes. And you have a remarkable ability to avoid answering direct questions." Lamb bristled. "I've been cooperative." "No," Wolfe said. "You've been circumspect. This is tiresome." I grinned. "Brace yourself," I told Lamb. "When he starts insulting your conversational talents, he's warming up." Wolfe continued. "Were you aware that Mr. Vance was being extorted?" Lamb jolted. "No." "Were you aware that he liquidated assets under duress?" Lamb hesitated. "He made withdrawals. But not excessive ones." "Mr. Lamb," Wolfe said, "your job was to monitor his financial stability, yet you failed to notice that he was hemorrhaging cash." "Explain." Lamb swallowed. "He told me it was for investments." Wolfe snorted. "Pfui. Did you believe him?" Lamb didn't answer. Wolfe leaned forward. "Mr. Vance hinted to several people that he feared exposure. He claimed someone knew things about him. Things that would disrupt his engagement. Did you know what those things were?" "No." "Did you wish to protect Miss Carroway from them?" Lamb startled. "Of course." "Indeed," Wolfe said softly. "You are loyal to her." He froze. "Aha, I thought. There it is." Wolfe pressed. "Were you loyal to Mr. Vance?" Silence. "That," Wolfe said, "is revealing." Lamb stood abruptly. "I don't have to endure this." "You do," Wolfe said. "Sit." Lamb sat. Wolfe's voice dropped to a velvet threat. "If you are shielding Miss Carroway from the truth about Mr. Vance, you are obstructing justice. If you are shielding yourself, you are a fool." Lamb looked at the floor. Wolfe waved him away. "Mr. Goodwin will escort you out. Reflect on whether you wish to be useful or irrelevant." I walked him to the door. He didn't speak. Not a word. The threat delivered. When I returned to the office, Wolfe was frowning at a small box on his desk. "What's that?" I asked. "It arrived while you were gone," he said. "Open it." "Me?" I said. "You think it's explosive?" It would be more useful if it were addressed to me, he said dryly. Open it. I opened the lid. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a metal cylinder, small, strange, and cold. A gun part. Not a normal one. Wolfe leaned in. Humph. What is it? I asked. A barrel component, he said. Unusual caliber. Modified. Modified how? Mechanically, Wolfe murmured. Ingeniously. Lydia appeared at the doorway, pale. What is that? Wolfe lifted the part with careful fingers. It, he said, is a message. A threat? I asked. No, Wolfe said. A promise. My stomach tightened. From who? He looked at me. Then at Lydia. Then at the gun part. From the murderer, he said softly. Who wishes to demonstrate that he is watching us. The brownstone felt suddenly smaller. Colder. And somewhere in New York, someone smiled in the shadows. Because the game, clearly, had begun. Chapter 6, The Real Target. If the perpetrator of our little disappearing bullet circus wanted to intimidate Nero Wolfe by mailing us a mysterious modified gun part, he must have been an optimist. Wolfe's emotional range doesn't include fear. Irritation, yes. Disgust, often. Outrage, regularly, especially when confronted with inefficiency or subpar cheese. But fear? That emotion is filed under mythical creatures and polite cab drivers. Still, the appearance of the package meant someone wasn't merely watching us, they were inviting Wolfe to a duel of intellects. Which is a mistake. Challenging Nero Wolfe is like challenging a glacier, you will be crushed, slowly and with disdain. But while Wolfe processed that in the lofty upper levels of his brain, I had a more practical reaction. I wanted to find the sender and introduce his face to a wall. Wolfe rearranges the universe, and my schedule. The morning after the package arrived, Wolfe called me into the office. He was seated behind the desk with the gun part laid out on a handkerchief, as if it were a relic from a particularly sinful saint. Archie, he said, we must accelerate. When you say, we, I said, you mean me. Correct. What needs accelerating? He steepled his fingers. The murderer has made an error. He believes Miss Carroway is the fulcrum of this case. Well, she did watch her fiancé get shot. He was not the target, Wolfe said. Meaning what? Meaning someone wanted Miss Carroway discredited, distraught, and perhaps dead. Why? That, he said, is what you must discover. I sighed. Have you considered doing any of the legwork yourself? He looked at me as if I proposed we both start singing opera in the bathtub. Archie. All right, all right. Where do I start? Mr. Lamb, Wolfe said. His loyalties are conflicted, and his knowledge is incomplete. Next, Miss Dunn. She is concealing something, whether through guilt or fear, I cannot yet determine. Finally, Harvey Rook. His resentment is too loud, too theatrical. And Montre? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Montre is a parasite. He may be involved, or he may simply be opportunistic. But he must be questioned again. I got out my notebook. I'll need a car. You may use a taxi, Wolfe said. I meant a fast car. Then take a taxi driven by a lunatic, he said. This is New York. You will find one easily. The secretary's secret. My first stop was Marion Dunn's apartment again. She answered the door looking like she'd spent the night embroidering her anxieties onto her pillowcase. Miss Dunn, I said, we need to talk again. I told you everything. You told me everything that didn't incriminate you, I corrected. Her shoulders sagged. She stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was just as neat as before, too neat. The air smelled faintly of lavender and paper. She perched on the couch like someone expecting a firing squad. "I didn't hurt Mr. Vance," she whispered. "I swear on my life." "I believe you," I said. "But you know something you're scared to say." She pressed trembling hands to her face. "It's not about Richard. It's about Lydia." I sat down. "Talk." She hesitated. "Then, Richard told me he'd made a mistake before his engagement. A terrible one. Someone knew and was using it to blackmail him." "What kind of mistake?" Her lips trembled. "He wouldn't say. But he said it involved a woman. Someone dangerous. A lover? I don't know. But he said that if Lydia ever found out, she would be in danger. Worse than he was." My pulse picked up. That tracked with Wolfe's theory. "And the phone calls? Before you left that day?" She nodded. "He said he was going to tell Lydia everything. And then he changed his mind. He was terrified. He told me to leave." "Did he say a name?" "No," she whispered. "But, he said something odd." "What?" "He said, if she calls again, don't answer. She doesn't want money anymore. She wants punishment." I stood up. "Miss Dunn, why didn't you tell me this before?" She broke down. "Because I thought it would hurt Lydia. Because I thought, whoever did this might come after me next." Which was, unfortunately, a valid concern. I gave her a reassuring pat and left her trembling on the couch. The financial advisor folds, a little. Arthur Lamb was at his office, pacing like a man trapped alone in a room full of unpaid invoices. He didn't resist when I asked for another chat, he just shut the door and sat. "Miss Carroway was followed yesterday," I told him. "Someone wants her frightened." His jaw tightened. "I'll call a private security firm." "No. What you're going to do is explain what you're not telling me." He swallowed hard. "Fine. You're right. I wasn't loyal to Richard. I thought Lydia deserved better." "That doesn't explain his terror," I said. "Or your evasiveness." Lamb rubbed his temples. "Richard told me he'd gotten involved with someone. Someone he regretted crossing. I told him to break it off. He said he couldn't." "Why not?" Lamb hesitated. "Because she didn't want the relationship ended. She wanted something else." "What something?" "I don't know," Lamb said miserably. "But it scared him." "Did she threaten Lydia?" His silence was answer enough. Harvey Rook throws a fit. When I dropped in on Harvey Rook, he was lounging in an armchair in a way only the deeply entitled can manage. He offered me a drink. I declined. Poison seemed too on brand for him. "Mr. Rook," I said, "you've been dramatic in the papers." He grinned. "The truth needs drama. You're about as subtle as a brass band. Let's cut through it. You hated your cousin." "Hate is too strong," he said. "But I disliked him. He cut me out of the family trust. And I wanted it undone. Is that a crime?" "No. But personally, I find greed boring." He bristled. "Are you here to insult me?" "No," I said. "I'm here to ask why Richard thought you would try to make Lydia doubt her own sanity." He froze. "He said that?" "He implied it." Rook's bravado deflated. "Look. Richard had secrets. Everyone does. But if someone wanted Lydia harmed, it wasn't me. I liked her. She was too kind to be tied to Richard's messes." "What messes?" He hesitated. "Ask Montre." Then he showed me the door. A visit to the art dealer. Montre's gallery was closed for inventory, which I interpreted as ducking questions. I knocked anyway. He let me in with the smile of a man who practices insincerity in a mirror. "You again," he said. "Wonderful. Rook tells me Vance had messes. Did you know about those? Montre's expression flickered. I knew he was troubled. Troubled how? He made strange purchases. Erratic choices. Expensive ones. Such as? A painting, Montre said slowly. From a private seller. He wouldn't say who. How private? Cash only, he said. Anonymous. And the painting is where now? Montre hesitated. He returned it. To whom? I don't know. Which was a lie. His lips twitched the way they do when someone lies but hopes you won't notice. And what did this anonymous seller want with Vance? I asked. Montre swallowed. To be paid. For what? He looked away. I think Richard wasn't buying art. I think he was buying silence. The puzzle was twisting itself into something darker. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe drops a bombshell. When I got home, Wolfe was in the office drinking his pre-dinner beer like it was a philosophy he disapproved of. Well, he demanded. I laid it out, Dunn's hidden story, Lamb's confession, Rook's hint, Montre's evasions. Wolfe listened with increasing grimness. When I was done, he tapped the gun part on the handkerchief. Archie, he said quietly, everything points to one conclusion. I leaned forward. Which is? Richard Vance was not the intended victim. I blinked. Then who? Miss Carroway, Wolfe said. Every detail fits. The threats. The fear. The orchestrated madness. The stalker. The attack on you. The camera of attention being turned on her, not him. I swallowed. Then the bullet that vanished. Was meant for her, Wolfe finished. He died because he stepped into its path, or because the killer mistimed the attempt. I sank into my chair. Boss, that makes this even worse. Correct, Wolfe said. Which is why we must gather our suspects. Why now? His eyes narrowed. Because, he said, the murderer is preparing to finish the job. And somewhere in Manhattan, the killer probably smiled. Because Nero Wolfe had finally drawn a line in the sand. Chapter 7, Wolfe's deduction in the office. By the time I got everyone assembled in Nero Wolfe's office, I felt like an underpaid stage manager arranging a cast of temperamental actors for a performance none of them had rehearsed for. Which, in a way, they hadn't. Wolfe liked his confrontations fresh. Less chance for suspects to coordinate stories. Or for me to get bored. The office was packed. Lydia Carroway, pale but steady. Arthur Lamb, stiff as a marble statue and twice as talkative. Marion Dunn, wringing her hands at a speed that could power a small generator. Harvey Rook, looking amused and predatory. Philip Montre, smooth as butter left out in July. They were seated in the red chairs and the guest sofa. Wolfe sat behind his desk like a very large deity deciding whether this congregation deserved mercy or thunderbolts. I stood to one side, ready to catch anyone who lunged, fainted, or tried to redecorate the room with a weapon. Wolfe began the proceedings by taking a long, slow sip of beer. The suspects watched him like he was about to announce the apocalypse. Ladies and gentlemen, Wolfe said, setting down the glass, I have invited you here because one of you has attempted murder. And succeeded at it once already. A collective flinch went through the room. Montre's tie twitched. Dunn whimpered. Lamb swallowed. Rook smirked. Lydia sat perfectly still, too still, like she was bracing for impact. Wolfe continued. This case presents several peculiarities. A gunshot with no bullet, a dead man who may not have been the intended victim, and a young woman whose sanity and reputation were targeted with precision. He turned his gaze on Lydia, and his voice grew gentler. Miss Carroway, the murderer sought to destroy you first with fear and then with doubt. And when that did not suffice, they attempted physical harm. Lydia's hand went to her throat. Lamb shifted in his chair, wanting to reach out to her, but Wolfe raised a finger. Lamb froze. Wolfe resumed. Let us review the known facts. Mr. Vance received threats. He paid blackmail. He feared exposure. Someone knew something damaging from his past, something that could ruin him, and Miss Carroway with him. Harvey Rook scoffed. Richard always had skeletons. Hardly news. Wolfe ignored him. He told Miss Dunn he was being cornered. He told Mr. Lamb he was afraid. He told Mr. Montre, through silence and desperate purchases, that he was attempting to hide something. Montre cleared his throat. I resent the implication that I... Phooey, Wolfe said. You resent many things. I have no time for your delicate sensibilities. I watched Montre's expression slide from offended to outraged. Wolfe had that effect on people. He pressed on. Someone wanted Miss Carroway unsettled. Confused. Vulnerable. The stalking, the following, the threats, they were designed to isolate her. In that light, the bizarre weapon becomes clearer. Clearer? Rook laughed. That bullet didn't exist. Wolfe gave him a look that suggested Rook's brain didn't exist either. Mr. Rook, he said, you mistake the unusual for the impossible. The wound was real, but the projectile was not recoverable. That leads us to a class of weapon that leaves no trace, one that fires a projectile which disappears. Lamb blanched. Dunn gasped. Montre frowned. Lydia just stared. Wolfe spread his hands. A compressed air system could fire something small yet lethal. Something that would leave a wound, cause death, and then dissolve entirely. He tapped the metal gun part on his desk. And our unknown assailant, in a perverse show of pride, mailed us evidence of such a mechanism. I cleared my throat. It's not every day someone sends us fan mail from a murder weapon. Indeed, Wolfe said dryly. He leaned forward. The question is, why Miss Carroway? What did she possess, or represent, that warranted such machinations? Lydia looked like she'd forgotten how to breathe. Lamb leaned toward her instinctively, Wolfe raised an eyebrow, and Lamb froze again. Wolfe resumed. Miss Dunn. Marion jolted. Why yes. You stated that Mr. Vance said the woman threatening him no longer wanted money. That she wanted punishment. Marion nodded miserably. Yes. Punishment for what? Wolfe asked. I don't know, he never said. But the threat extended to Miss Carroway, Wolfe said. Which means the motive was tied to the engagement. He let that hang in the air like smoke. Someone wanted the engagement destroyed, or wanted Miss Carroway eliminated entirely. And that motive predates the murder. Now the tension in the air was thick enough to spread on toast. Let us examine each of you, Wolfe said calmly. Mr. Rook, you disliked your cousin and coveted his fortune. I didn't kill him, Rook said, sneering. You think I'd go through all that trouble instead of just hiring a thug? Wolfe gave him a look. Your candor is unhelpful. But I concur, you are too impulsive and too limited in ingenuity. Rook glared. Mr. Montre, Wolfe said, you profited from Mr. Vance's anxieties. You also lied about the painting he purchased and returned. Likely a cover for blackmail payments. Montre stiffened. That is absurd. It is not, Wolfe said. But your deceptions were financial, not emotional. Your motive for harming Miss Carroway is dubious. Montre's relief was immediate and too visible. I mentally filed it under, guilty of something, not murder. Miss Dunn, Wolfe continued. She trembled. I didn't, I swear. I know, Wolfe said. You are too frightened, too honest, and too fond of Miss Carroway to wish her harm. That got a small, grateful sob. Wolfe turned to Lamb. Mr. Lamb. Lydia stiffened. Lamb turned gray. You are deeply loyal to Miss Carroway, Wolfe said. Your affection for her is evident. Perhaps even blinding. Lamb swallowed. Mr. Wolfe, don't. But you disliked Mr. Vance, Wolfe continued, and you disapproved of the engagement. You also knew more about his blackmail than you admitted. Lamb gripped the arms of his chair. I wanted to protect her. Yes, Wolfe said softly. But not by murder. Lamb sagged. Then Wolfe looked at Lydia. Miss Carroway, he said gently. The attempt on your life, and the killing of your fiancé, were not random acts. Someone wanted to punish Mr. Vance by taking from him the thing he valued most, you. She whispered, but, who would hate him that much? Wolfe tapped the gun part again. That is the question. And one of you has the answer. The room exploded into overlapping protests. I demand a lawyer. This is insane. You can't accuse. What about the woman? He lied to all of us. Wolfe raised one hand. Silence slammed down like a curtain. You misunderstand, Wolfe said. I do not yet accuse. I deduce. And deduction requires patience. All of you will return tomorrow evening. By then, I shall know the identity of the killer. Rook scoffed. And if we refuse? Wolfe gave him a mild smile, the kind that could freeze volcanoes. Mr. Rook, if any of you refuse, Mr. Goodwin will escort you personally. Or the police will do so less pleasantly. I cracked my knuckles. I'm the pleasant option. Lamb shot a protective look at Lydia. Dunn whimpered again. Montre tried to calculate whether he could run in Italian loafers. Wolfe continued, none of you will leave New York. None of you will attempt to contact one another. And none of you will attempt harm, because if you do, Mr. Goodwin will be informed instantly. I grinned. Christmas comes early. Wolfe folded his hands. Go, he said. All of you. Return at 8 tomorrow. One by one, they filed out, leaving tension in their wake like dust from a stampede. When the front door finally shut, I turned to Wolfe. You said you'll know the killer by tomorrow? Yes. Do you know now? He closed his eyes, leaned back, and let out a long breath. No, he said. But I will. Then, Archie, tonight you will remain vigilant. The killer is cornered. And cornered animals are dangerous. That, I said, is a comforting bedtime thought. He didn't open his eyes. Archie. Yes. Do not let Miss Carroway die. There it was. The real heart of this whole twisted case. A killer lurking. A truth half-formed. A woman in danger. And Wolfe, massive, immovable, absolute, calculating in silence. Tomorrow, he would name the murderer. But tonight, I had to keep them alive. Chapter 8, The Killer Revealed and Justice Served. There's a particular kind of hush that descends over Nero Wolfe's office before a showdown. It isn't silence exactly, more like the city itself takes a breath and holds it. Even the orchids upstairs seem to be listening, which is ridiculous, but that's how the place felt at 7:50 the next evening. At 7:30, Fritz had quietly armed me with a tray of hors d'oeuvres for the guests. At 7:40, Wolfe had consumed his pre-confrontation beer with the solemnity of a judge donning robes. By 7:45, I'd checked the phone line, the locks, the lights, and the seating arrangement, Wolfe's version of setting a tactical battlefield. At 7:58 exactly, the doorbell rang. I answered it to find the full cast assembled on the stoop like they were posing for a newspaper shot titled Society Figures Gather for Mystery. They filed in with the enthusiasm of schoolchildren reporting for detention. Lydia Carroway, fragile but determined. Arthur Lamb, looking like he hadn't slept since Roosevelt was president. Marion Dunn, trembling so hard her earrings clicked. Harvey Rook, swagger dialed up to 11. Philip Montre, glossy-haired and bitter-smiled. Wolfe didn't rise when they entered. Wolfe rarely rises for anything short of fire or earthquakes. But he did look at each of them in turn, with that heavy, penetrating gaze of his that makes grown adults forget their own names. "Be seated," he ordered. They obeyed. Even Rook, whose ego usually required 3 chairs, slumped into one. I took my position by the globe, arms folded, ready to intercept lungers and sprinters. Wolfe exhaled, a deep, preparatory rumble. "Tonight," he said, "we conclude." The temperature in the room seemed to slide down 10 degrees. "You are here," Wolfe continued, "because one of you killed Richard Vance using a mechanism designed to leave no bullet, no trace, no proof. And then attempted to harm Miss Carroway." Lydia flinched. I took a step closer to her seat. Wolfe continued. "My task, therefore, is to identify which of you had motive, opportunity, and above all, knowledge." Harvey Rook made a scoffing noise. Wolfe ignored him. "In studying this case, I found 3 essential questions. 1. Why would someone want Miss Carroway discredited, or dead? 2. What secret of Mr. Vance could warrant such extremes? 3. Who among you had access to a weapon of such ingenious design?" Montre tried to interrupt. "This is absurd." "Silence," Wolfe snapped. "You will speak when I allow it." Montre shrank back. Even his hair looked chastened. Wolfe took another sip of beer. "Let us begin with motive." He pointed a finger, slowly, deliberately, at Harvey Rook. "You, Mr. Rook, had much to gain from Vance's death, inheritance, attention, perhaps even validation. But you lack the disposition for subtlety. You are loud, impulsive, and intellectually unambitious." Rook blinked. "Is that supposed to be an insult?" "It is a description," Wolfe said. "Though an unflattering one." Rook shrugged proudly. "Then I'm innocent." "Of this," Wolfe said, "yes." Wolfe turned to Lamb next. "You, Mr. Lamb, loved Miss Carroway in a manner you attempted, poorly, to disguise. You disliked Vance and wished the engagement ended. Yet you would not harm Miss Carroway." Lamb's shoulders sagged in relief. Wolfe raised a finger. "However, you concealed knowledge of Vance's blackmail. That was foolish." Lamb swallowed. "I was trying to protect her." "It was still foolish," Wolfe said. "But not murderous." Lamb sagged again. Next, Wolfe addressed Montre. "Mr. Montre, you lied about the painting Vance purchased. You withheld information about the seller. You profited from his fear." Montre stiffened. "I run a business, Mr. Wolfe." "You run a racket," Wolfe corrected. "But you are not a killer. You are greedy, not violent." Montre's eyes narrowed. "You can't prove." "I do not need to," Wolfe said. "Your guilt is financial, not mortal." Montre shut up. For once. Wolfe then turned to Marion Dunn. She shrank like a flower hit with frost. "Miss Dunn," Wolfe said gently, "your loyalty is to Miss Carroway. Your fear is genuine. You conceal nothing of importance." She let out a small sob of relief. Then Wolfe faced Lydia. "Miss Carroway," he said softly. "You were the true target. Everything else was misdirection." Her breath caught, but she said nothing. And then, Wolfe turned his head slightly toward me. A signal. It was time. I quietly moved to stand directly behind the personal secretary, Marion Dunn. But Wolfe didn't look at her. He looked at Lydia Carroway. "Miss Carroway," he said, "you did not know the murderer's identity. But the murderer knew you." She blinked, startled. Wolfe lifted the small gun part between his fingers. "This component," he said, "is the key. It belongs to a modified compressed air device, engineered by someone with technical aptitude and access to specialized tools. He paused. Mr. Vance did not possess such aptitude. But you, Miss Carroway, had a fiancé who feared exposing his past. And that past involved a woman who was not merely dangerous, but ingenious. Lydia stared at him, stunned. Then Wolfe turned, slowly, deliberately, toward Marion Dunn. The room froze. "No," Marion whispered. "No. Miss Dunn," Wolfe said, "you had the skill. You had the motive. You were the unnamed woman from Mr. Vance's past, the one he wished to forget, the one he paid to disappear." Marion's lips trembled violently. "That's not, I." Wolfe continued mercilessly. "You loved him once. Obsessively. When he ended it and chose Miss Carroway, you saw it as betrayal. You extorted him. Threatened him. And when he attempted to confess to Miss Carroway, you acted." "No," Marion whispered. "You followed him," Wolfe said. "You entered the terrace. You fired a dissolving projectile at Lydia, but Vance stepped in the way. The projectile dissolved, the wound baffled the police. You fled. And later, you stalked Miss Carroway, delivered threats, and attacked Mr. Goodwin to silence him." Montre gasped. Lamb looked sick. Rook swore softly. Lydia stared at Marion in horror. You tried to kill me." Marion broke. Completely. She sprang from her chair with a choked cry. "I was faster. I grabbed her wrists before she could reach Lydia. She fought like a wildcat, sobbing, shrieking, begging, but I held firm. You don't understand," she screamed. "He promised me everything. I gave him everything. And then he threw me away for her. That is enough," Wolfe said sharply. Marion collapsed, sobbing into my shoulder until I could maneuver her into the chair again. That's when the front door burst open. Inspector Kramer stormed in, Stedman behind him. "Goodwin." Kramer barked. "You better have." He saw Marion. Then he saw Wolfe. Then he sighed like a man who had hoped for a quiet evening. "Wolfe," he said. "Tell me you didn't drag me across Manhattan for nothing." Wolfe folded his hands. "Inspector," he said calmly, "I present to you the murderer of Richard Vance, and the assailant of Miss Carroway and my assistant." Stedman handcuffed Marion gently. Kramer looked at her with the weariness of a man who has arrested too many people who should have made better choices. Marion didn't fight anymore. She just stared at Lydia, eyes hollow, broken, and furious. "You took everything," she whispered. "No," Lydia said softly. "You gave it away." Kramer signaled Stedman. They escorted Marion out. The moment the door closed, the room exhaled. Rook stumbled out first. Montre muttered something about lunacy. Lamb stayed long enough to take Lydia's hand before leaving silently. Lydia lingered last. She approached Wolfe. "Thank you," she whispered. Wolfe inclined his head. "You are safe now, Miss Carroway." She squeezed my hand before leaving. Her fingers were cold, but steady. When the door finally shut behind her, Wolfe let out a long, heavy breath and reached for his beer. "Well," he said, "that is done." I grinned. "Should I put that on your tombstone someday?" He solved it. "Now bring beer." "Humph, imbecile." I poured him another glass. He drank it. And the brownstone, our odd, cluttered, orchid-scented fortress, returned to its ordinary evening calm. Another case closed. Another murderer caught. Another reminder that in a city full of shadows, Nero Wolfe remains the immovable, irritable, unstoppable force that keeps the darkness at bay. And me? I'm the guy who makes sure he doesn't have to stand up while doing it.